All right. I am really excited to bring Ken and Jimmy, my co-founders in Maven, on to share a little bit more about what we've been building. And a number of you were involved in what we kind of call Maven 1.0 months and months ago now. It feels like a lifetime ago, but maybe not all that long. But the vision has stayed the same, but sort of the implementation of that has definitely updated in a big way. And we're excited to share that. So I'm going to kick it over to Ken to start. Him and Jimmy have a long and storied history that is really relevant to what we're building. So Ken, I'll turn it over to you and we'll kind of kick it off there.
All right, thanks, Bless, and thanks to everybody for coming in to learn a little bit about what we've been doing. I know some of you have heard about, or maybe even seen in some cases, the first version of Maven, or maybe even have seen me talk. So hopefully not to be too redundant, but this is something new, and even for those. But I wanted to back up a little to just why I came to be doing this, and why I came to intersect with Bloss. And Jimmy as well, who Jimmy's actually has a very long relationship with me, as he was once my PhD student a long time ago. So we always wanted to do something together. And I come from artificial intelligence research. I was involved in an area that's called open-endedness. And some of you have heard me talk about this before, but if you haven't heard about it, it's basically an area of artificial intelligence that's about algorithms that will continually produce interesting stuff indefinitely. And so this is a really unique area. It's not like most of machine learning, because it's an area where you actually don't know what you're going to get after you run the system. So almost all other areas of machine learning, there's kind of like a goal, like it's like the robot should learn to walk, or the language model should learn to talk. But in open-endedness, it's basically saying there's interesting things to be discovered, go out and discover them. I don't know what they are. And so this kind of system is really interesting. And by the way, this will tie into why are we doing Maven? So sort of sounds like it's out there, but it's going to tie in. But this kind of system is just independently interesting because it's really about creativity, if you think about it. It's about how systems can produce new stuff, like genuinely new stuff. And that's something that is very challenging for computers, but humans are very good at it. And, to see an example, just look at civilization. Civilization is a really like canonical example and grandiose example of an open-ended system. And so like when AI researchers are thinking about open-endedness, it would be nice at the limit, or at least it would be most human-like, if artificial systems could do stuff like produce civilization, like all the things that have ever been invented. It's not just technology, it's art and music and everything else. And that comes from this open-ended process of creativity where things build upon each other over eons. Biological evolution is another example, which actually precedes us. It's not dependent on intelligence, but it produced intelligence. And so I was interested in how those kinds of systems work, because it's kind of like the ultimate holy grail of AI in some way, for it to actually be able to create interesting things, run scientific experiments, create new literature, whatever it is. That's a very high bar. And so in the process of studying this kind of AI, systems of increasing complexity, we started doing some experiments with humans in the loop. And one reason to have humans in the loop in those experiments is because we don't know how to build open-ended systems like completely autonomously. Like I said, it's like a holy grail. So we don't actually know how to make it work. So there's a cheat you can do, which is like, if you find a way to integrate a computer system that's aiming for open-endedness with people, well, people already are open-ended. So basically cheating and sort of piggybacking on our propensity to be able to produce original ideas, but then using an algorithm, wrapping an algorithm around that, to see an artificial open-ended process unfold. And one of those that we did was called Breeder. So this was an experiment on this kind of a system. The pick breeder system was a system that allowed users to breed pictures, basically. But it's an open-ended system because there's not a goal in the system. It's just, you can just explore breeding things. And it's like breeding dogs or horses or anything. You just like choose an image that's already there and it will have children. And so people could breed images in whatever direction they want. It was called Pick Breeder on the internet. And Jimmy actually led that project years and years ago when he was a grad student. And so why I mentioned it is because it revealed a very fundamental and interesting insight into how these kinds of systems work, which wasn't really recognized before, which is very counterintuitive, which is that sometimes it's actually very important not to have an explicit objective if you want to be creative, if you want to be innovative, if you want to make discoveries. Or having an objective can be bad. And so like that means that was true in pick breeder. That was an empirical observation. So that was something that we observed through hundreds or thousands of images that were discovered, that the people who were discovering were people who were not looking for them. It's extremely counterintuitive and paradoxical. We understood that this is actually a fairly deep lesson. It's not just about breeding pictures. I mean, it's really a lesson about life, because if you're too myopically focused on an objective, it causes you to miss the stepping stones that are around you that could lead to interesting places that are not that objective. And the problem is that some of those interesting stepping stones don't look like your objective, but actually might still lead to your objective. So you actually become blind to the steps that might lead you to where you want to go because you're too focused on where you want to go. It's very paradoxical. But if you think about it, that's basically the way complex spaces are, or hard problems, let's say. Like, what would it mean for a problem to be hard if the stepping stones were obvious? Then it's by definition not a hard problem. And of course, the only problems in some sense that we're actually interested in are the ones that are hard, because the easy ones we just solve. So it's a really big problem if this is true, and we were convinced with all the evidence that we had that this is a true aspect of search processes in general. And so that's why I decided, and I did this with a co-author of mine named Joe Lehman, that we should write a book about this. He was another grad student at the time, around Jimmy's time, actually. We should write a book about this that's not just for AI researchers. That's what we decided, because we basically thought, but every human institution runs by objectives. Like everything you do, there's like OKRs in industry, like in academia, you have majors, like in the government has certain goals, and like funding agencies that fund scientific projects, that they ask you, like, the only way you're going to get money is to tell them what the objective is. But if like having an objective actually prevents you from discovering things, it's a terrible policy to have, but that's the way everything works. Now, it doesn't mean that nobody should have an objective. I just want to be clear. Like, we're not saying anything bad about modest objectives. You can set modest objectives all day and they actually do work. So you want to upgrade your software to version 2 from version 1 or something, like that's done all the time. Like companies do that. You know what the steps are, you just have to do them. Like that's a fine thing. Talking about cases where like it's really ambitious or blue sky, we don't know how to do the thing that we're really interested in. Like, how are we going to cure cancer? How are we going to like create human level AI and so forth? The stepping stones are completely unknown. And so we thought, like Joel and I thought, that we should actually try to initiate a broader public conversation, because we're actually worried after noticing this property. And this is a really weird story if you think about it, because it's like a story about AI research that somehow like develops into a social commentary, which I've never heard of. I've never heard of that before or since. So it's really unusual. But here's the social critique, basically, but it's motivated by AI research. It's not because we're social scientists or philosophers or something. So we created this book, and we thought, like, it's just important. Like, this is just important. People should talk about it. It was a weird career move for me, because I should be publishing AI research papers, but I just wrote this book. It was called Why Greatness Cannot Be Planned. And that was 8 years ago that it came out. And the reason that this is all relevant is because then, strangely enough, that led to 8 years of talking to people about this issue who are not in AI. So what issue exactly is this? Like, it's the issue of, non-objective types of pursuits, or you might call it serendipity. If you think about what the title of the book, Why Greatness Cannot Be Planned, well, when greatness is not planned and something good happens to you, that's called serendipity, right? Like, you didn't plan on it, but it happened. So it's basically serendipity. So, I mean, I'm mentioning that because really what I realized in hindsight, even though the word doesn't come up that much in the book, but it does come up, is that really it was a book about serendipity. And I started to more strongly realize this as I talked to people about the book, because many communities got in touch with me because I learned that everybody's sick of objectives everywhere. It's like this straitjacket on top of society. Like, no matter where you are, I understand that most people are upset about this. They feel like there's not enough opportunity to explore, to discover, to do things that just because they're interesting. It's even talking to your parents, like, how do you justify what you're choosing to do with your life and so forth? What's your objective? How are you going to make money? Like, everybody at all kinds of levels and all kinds of professional situations and personal situations was disgruntled about this, and was looking for a more serendipitously oriented type of social structure, whatever that might mean, in whatever context they're in. And this is something that I realized over years of talking to many different communities. I talk to so many diverse communities because if you think about the message of the book is so generic, it could be anybody could be interested in this point. Um, and individuals too. I talk to one-on-ones, everything. And so over the years of learning about this kind of disenchantment with the way that things work in general, it's a very general critique. I started to feel like last year, like basically 2022, that I should do something about this. Like because I'm like, kind of like filling up with all of this disillusionment of people. And my response is basically just to talk to more people. And I started feeling like I should do something. I should be able to do something. Like there's demand without supply. Like people want more serendipity, but there's not a product that's available for this. And it's like hard to imagine there could be a product. But then I thought, oh, wait a second though, like it shouldn't be this kind of like just fuzzy, like kind of a new age type of issue, like everybody should just pursue their interests. Like that's just like some new age philosophy because I actually was building algorithms that do this to begin with. It's not like this all emerges from like this kind of like new age philosophy. It emerges from concrete algorithms that were implemented. There are names like novelty search, quality diversity algorithms. Like there's all these things that we were doing. PickBreeder itself is concrete. Like we actually ran that system and that experiment. And so it occurred to me that like if there is some way to create a system that would actually increase the amount of serendipity in the world, like I should know how to do that. Um, and so like thinking about this more, I thought, well, okay, so what this is basically, it's a way of wrapping these algorithms, which are understood, it's understood basically how to accelerate and to facilitate serendipitous types of discovery in an algorithm. But I just need to wrap that around people. So like people are in the loop of the algorithm, so that it's facilitating our own discovery as human beings. And that's doable. I mean, PickBreeder had humans in the loop. Like, there's no reason we couldn't do that. And so that implied the next thing I realized is, well, that's like a social network. Obviously, like if there's people in a network and something is causing them to connect in a certain way, it's basically a social network. But it's like a completely different kind of social network because if you think about it, it's coming from a totally different trajectory of historical thinking than what has led us to where we are today in social networking. Because where we are today was not derived from like all these like people thinking about how open-ended systems work. I mean, that's like an esoteric branch of AI research. Like the history that precedes us in social networking is about things like how do you increase engagement? So you get like ideas like the like button, like that's really powerful, or followers, like you get these powerful ideas which increase engagement and have been successful at addicting everybody to these services. But interestingly, it's totally aligned with what the book is arguing against, because like basically these are objective-based systems. They're based on maximization. Maximize the number of followers and maximize the number of likes. This means you have the best kind of content. You're winning that objective game. And then that will be exposed to the most number of people. It's consensus driven, and consensus is a very objective process. But if you think about it, like serendipity is idiosyncratic and not consensus driven. If you think about like what were in your life the most transformative inflection points, like where something happened, it's like you took that class, but you thought you would hate it, but actually changed your life, and that turned into what you did with your life, or something like that. Like if we went to the moment before you decided to do that, and said, let's put it to a vote. Like let's see, like would the 1,000 people in your school agree? Like you should take that class. Like this would be a horrible way. It's just like you might have missed that opportunity. There's nothing to do with them at all, right? Because like the special idiosyncratic thing that like resonates with you and leads you down a new path, that stepping stone, it's nothing to do with consensus at all. It's completely idiosyncratic. And so like these systems are basically anti what our book was talking about, and therefore a new system that's more aligned with it would be anti those systems. Like it's basically something that's a genuine alternative. And then it struck me that, well, that's a good thing because like everybody wants a genuine alternative. If you look at like current social networks like Twitter or something like that, it's really interesting that like when an alternative comes out, like Threads, to a lot of fanfare, what we see is basically the same system cloned. Like the alternative is basically the same system. The pitch seems to be, well, it's under new management. It's not that it's a different system. It's just we basically have the exact same functionality, but it's a new management, so you should want to do it there. But there's no real alternative being offered. And so it kind of makes sense that like, well, this actually is not a bad place to be, to offer something that's a genuine alternative that disposes of all of these things. And that's what led, Jimmy and I were unified for years, because like we worked on Pick Breeder together. We've always kind of been touching base over the years, like, do we want to do something? And this led to like a good point for us to come together again and do something. And I think that's what led to my alliance with Jimmy. And so maybe I should give Jimmy a chance if you want to add anything on to that from your own experiences leading up to this.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. You know, the work I did with Ken, it was to me so interesting and such it was such a great sort of meta example of all of this, because so I was, when I took Ken's class, I was, as a PhD student, I was already on I had an advisor, I was already on a track. We were working on my background is privacy preserving machine learning. So this whole, subset of machine learning stuff where, you try to, keep things private, but still get the information you want. And we were writing respectable papers, and I was working on a respectable sounding thesis. And at the time, data mining was, a phrase that was not, super common, but, we were working on things and they had practical value for practical people, and they were, systems that you could get a job around. And, one day I took Ken's class, and loved Ken's class and thought it was super interesting. And, I would hang around like a lost puppy in his, in his research group, just sort of not affiliated really, but just like they let me join, the meetings, and, got into the stuff. And, Pick Breeder came out of like, a great discussion we had, and kind of like right at the end of a meeting. And it was nothing to do with my dissertation, but it was something that a few of us at the end of this meeting just agreed was so interesting that we just had to work on it, right? And I think like it's such a great example. From all objective accounts, it was a bad idea to stop whatever, to get distracted and go do this instead, because I was like struggling through my PhD. It's sort of you're all but dissertation. You're trying to get enough things so they finally, have mercy on you and let you graduate. And the last thing, I sort of needed at the time was like, oh, and here's just another project to burn additional time. But I think it was powerful because sometimes ideas strike you, and you have to work on them. And I think also later we tried to like get some funding for it or whatever, and the reviewers, like some reviewers were like, this is super interesting, and some reviewers were like, this is an awful idea and you should seek other career options or whatever, right? So like but it's like, by all accounts we shouldn't have been working on this, but we couldn't stop working on this because it was just so interesting, and it felt like it was, and every day it felt like it was leading to some interesting conclusion or some interesting new way of looking at things. And, and in the end, we, it was really cool. We really enjoyed it. And, but yeah, as a consequence, kept in touch with Ken, but it was, it was like, it was not the logical thing, but the interest kind of drove us forward on it. And I think that's like a lesson that that I always try to keep, through things like, well, even if it feels like you've sunk cost into other things, like, follow your nose, you'll feel what's interesting. I think Ken and Joel like beautifully reinforce it in the book, and, make this great scientific case for it. And now I feel like we're trying to make a lot of that, infuse the app, right? That, just like Ken said, we, all those things are just set up to, maximize the objective. Like engagement means, eyeball seconds. In the intervening time, after I worked with Ken and I graduated, I went and I got, a job in like ads, like a lot of, machine learning people did. And, that's the kind of stuff we worked on, and driving attention and driving, clicks, engagement, that kind of stuff. And people love it. It's easy to measure, but I think a lot of us can intuitively tell that while the systems that we are using every day, Facebook and Twitter and Threads now, and are doing a good job of optimizing that that objective of like, well, we showed you this like, awful train wreck of a conversation, or this, super controversial thing, or this disturbing and upsetting thing, or this, somebody acting in this like awful, absurd way. And they're like, we did it. You were curious and you clicked and we won. We all succeeded together. And this must be what you wanted because it optimized the objective. And so many of us can intuitively tell, and are frustrated with like, oh no, this is not what success in social media looks like, right? That there was maybe a time where it felt like, I remember like being in 8th grade and our school got, internet connected computers, and you got that, you got on the internet, you found found interesting things, and you're like, oh my God, look at everything that's out there. And nothing like that feels like that today. And so, we're trying to bring that more in line of and using those principles, and I'm really excited to do it, of just saying like, look, this, and actually over the last couple iterations, we tried to make this feel a lot more familiar, but the subtle change is really important. That when our tagline is follow your interests, not influencers, and everything actually is sort of reflecting that in the product, where wherever we can, we're trying to push you into like exploring some new interest, and again, not coming at it from the, I remember they used to, when TV was invented, the people who, were most excited about it, like, oh, kids will learn Latin on this someday. And it's like, but we're not coming from this like paternalistic, oh, well, this will just be the healthier way to use it. Like, it's coming from a deep and abiding assertion that like, actually the world and the internet is a lot more interesting than the view that has been optimized into our eyeballs every day, and we want it, and we'll be happy when we get it. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on
it. Jimmy, yeah, thanks for that. I wanted to, and we're gonna momentarily pass it back to Blas too, because I want to, actually tie it all together. But I wanted to just add a little bit of a little more of a practical kind of perspective on just what you're getting with this, because I understand that from your group, you're coming from a place where you have a lot of interesting discussions. You talk to each other about different topics, and I think that the structure of what we're going to show you, which for those who saw V1 is now actually evolved a lot. So this is no longer like the V1 version of Maven. It's actually, I think, very well suited to this kind of idea, that like there's a group of people who have a number of interesting threads going on, and sometimes it's kind of hard to sort out which people should be looking at what threads at any given time. In other words, one way to think about the service that we're going to show you is that it's like a self-organizing group chat. It's like if I could send a message and just go to the people who would find it interesting, then that would be useful to me. But I don't want to be siloed in the sense that like some things that we talk about have to do with multiple different interests at the same time. So like, for example, just to make this more concrete, like if you think about like, if you were going to say something about New York City on Reddit, like you could go to the subreddit for New York City and you could say it and say, imagine that you want to say something about the way that the city is planned or something like that. To say, well, the planning really could be better because X, Y, Z. So that you can share that with everybody who's talking about New York City. But see, the problem is that there's another subreddit called urban planning. It's a different silo. They would probably find your commentary interesting, but they won't see it because it's all siloed. It goes to the place that you sent it, the community you joined. Our system will sort all of this out and keep it straight. So people interested in New York City, people interested in urban planning, they'll all see the thing about both of them. And it will cause those communities to intersect with each other appropriately when those conversations are intersecting. And it'll just pull them apart when it's appropriate to pull them apart. And so you don't have to keep track of all like who said what about which topic and where in the thread and stuff like that. It's all being kept track of in a nice, orderly way, because the way the system is organized with this idea that this is not organized around just following people. It's about following interests. And so I think that like the point of this is just that this should probably, it's just like a really convenient way to facilitate like the kinds of discussions that you guys are having, but to keep it organized so they can keep going, so you don't lose threads and they don't just like fall by the wayside. So who's talking to who doesn't become confusing. Should we separate off into another group or not? Like all of that stuff should be housekeeping that's like totally done by the system. And so I think that's maybe a practical motivator for trying it out. But at the more kind of grandiose level, I think we want to change social networking like entirely. Like that's our hope here. It's be very ambitious. We want to get rid of this likes and follows paradigm, which is basically a tyranny that controls the entire internet. I mean, it's even off social network. I mean, things that aren't like technically social networks like YouTube or something. It's all works through this kind of stuff. We want to show that there is an alternative way. And so we are facing, a need to get things off the ground, which is like a cold start problem. And that's always challenging for any network, is to start from scratch, because why would you join a network when there's no one in it? And so you guys can be very helpful for us to have an opportunity to get over the cold start hump, which would then allow us to create this really interesting experiment, I think, to see if there's a different way. So that's what I would say before turning over to Bloss. And I think that he can tie himself into also, because like there's a whole other side of this story of like, why did we get together with Bloss, which I think made this like a totally complete partnership.
Yeah, thanks, Ken and Jimmy. And Jimmy, maybe we do a quick product demo after to, again, just bring it to life and make somewhat abstract ideas a little bit more concrete. But yeah, really quickly on my end, I mean, this stepping stone thing just hits home deeply for me. Like I was living in LA, someone who joined Lattice as one of the first partners reached out, and because he had found the rabbit hole, and he said, "Can I buy you a coffee?" And I said yes. And 7 years later, he introduced me to Ken, and that kind of formed, the foundation of Maven. And with all these interactions with the community, I'm in this super interesting spot where, close to 400 people now think of me as like that node. And I wish that existed for everyone. Like I'm the bottleneck in almost everything, right? People ask all the time, who can I talk to about this? Or I'm interested in this, who can I talk to? Or, we've experimented with Akeem's help, this idea of circles within Lattice, right? Like a parenting circle, a longevity circle. And like, that is hard work, like him especially, but we have both like put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to like herd cats around a certain topic to talk about that thing and like try to get that going. And the hope is that Maven can do that pretty frictionlessly. You post a question, a problem, an idea, we kind of auto tag it based on whatever the content of that thing is, and it gets sent to people who share those interests, right? So whether it's New York and urban planning or parenting and toddlers or startups and AI, you can write about anything without having to think about who it goes to or where or why. And people who share that interest will see it. And again, this will be hopefully made clearer when we do a little quick product demo here. But like, that's really that intention. We can't mention it before, but this idea of a self-organizing group chat, right? WhatsApp is really hard to follow. You guys, like, you're all part of the Lattice thing. There's hundreds of messages. How do you navigate it? Most people archive it or mute it. And I get that. Like, I lead this thing and it's hard to keep up with, right? Like, I don't expect anyone to do this full time. But if this notion of like, I can just pop into Maven, and again, it's organized by interest. I want to see what people have written about AI or parenting or toddlers or education. And that kind of curates your feed based around that interest. You can jump in and out of discussions that you actually care about. That's the hope. That's the intention. So anyway, this notion of like a single threaded group chat with more than 100 people, let alone 400 people, is disastrous, right? Is like not meant for that. So this is sort of that quasi evolution of not a broadcast to everyone. Everyone always cares. I'm always building a brand. This kind of like icky social media game that we've heard a lot of people be tired of. But hey, I'm genuinely curious about the ripple effects of, Vision Pro, whatever. Where do I go for that? Who do I talk to about that? I mean, I actually care. Twitter's not a place for it. I can put it into Lattice, but maybe it gets lost, maybe it doesn't. But again, the intention here is that would go to actually people who care about that thing to kickstart that conversation. So anyway, I'm coming at this not at all from a technical side, as you all know, but more from like a community building social side, right? Like I've been the beneficiary of this community in so many amazing ways, like deal flow. When I travel, I know people in basically every country, like all these ripple effects of just being part of this community. And can we scale that? Can we give that to anyone on any interest? That's my hope and my intention with this. And yeah, Ken, fill in the dots if there's anything that I forgot to mention there or anything, but if not, maybe we kind of turn it over to Jimmy and go from there.
No, I think I mean, I do think it's interesting, like how, you know, the history, your history of building this community, and thinking about the best way to facilitate that eventually intersects with my and Jimmy's interest in open-ended systems. It's like a completely unpredictable type of like union. I mean, you would never think that you and I would ever even meet each other, let alone work together. But it just really works at this point in time, I think, like to bring these kind of ideas together. So I think it made a really good partnership to do something like this. So I just wanted to say that, and we can, yeah, we can check it out so you can see a little bit of what we've built. Oh, actually, maybe we should mention that like this is this product is like kind of like an MVP. Like it's basically finally a product. Like you can actually use it. It works. And we've been working on it all year long. It's gone through different phases, but this is actually usable, and it actually is functioning now.
And we'll invite you. That's not a tease. We'll send out the link after and everything, and would love to get you involved in all that. So yeah, Jimmy, maybe turn it over to you. But yeah, let's go from there.
Yeah. And we're actually getting ready to submit them to the appropriate app stores, but you know, we can get you a test flight link, and we sort of like that anyway. Of, you know, you're a trusted and helpful group, and you know, having your feedback, especially on new things that we sort of bring out, you know, early is you know, especially helpful. So obviously, Bloss and Ken, feel free to chime in on anything that I'm not covering here or missing. But yeah, you know, versus, you know, for anybody who saw the earlier version, you know, we tried to actually get to a feed that was a little bit more you know, recognizable, just so we could keep sparking more conversations. Like, yeah, in the older version, you would, you know, you could go and see other conversations that were happening, but, you know, not necessarily join. So we wanted to, you know, sort of make this, okay, all the good things you get from the feed of some, you know, a constant, you know, influx of new and interesting stuff. And forgive these are test posts on my you know, machine here. The real version has more interesting stuff. But you know, continuously developing feed and, you know, crackling and active conversations that are, you know, popping back up to the top, all the while trying to make the conversation that you have inside here feel like a real chat going on, versus, you know, something that is you know, right now so many of the social networks are oriented toward like, okay, I make a post and then, you know, everybody gets to comment, and you know, and yes, occasionally, you know, the original poster engages with that, but that's not what we wanted here. We know that, you know, great serendipitous moments, they don't come from this, you know, sort of kind of vague spectator interaction. They come when you know, you actually get into a meaningful back and forth conversation with people, but one that people feel like they can join and they're comfortable to join, but also can you know, get up to date on it if they just want to, you know, watch. And you know, the proverbial like being at the dinner party and just, you know, kind of you know, perching in the corner and listening to the great conversation that's happening there. You know, we want this to feel like that. And of course, we want this feed to, you know, reflect your interests, and we want users to be able to be explicit about those interests, you know. So, you know, I feel like a lot of social network. So this is where you personalize your feed. You had a few at onboarding, and you can always add more and more as you go in. But we feel like a lot of social networks currently, they're focused on, well, no, people don't really want that kind of, people don't want to specify what they want. We'll tell you what you want and what's popular and all of that, and it'll be so smooth, and you'll never need to worry about anything. And we wanted to go for something that was very much the opposite, where you're telling us explicitly the kinds of things you're interested in, and we use that as the highest law to rule your feed, not, this is popular, this is what's trending. Like, we want it to always match your interests. So you can always come back in here, choose from some interests we have, but if it's not covered here and you're like, oh, I love Japanese pottery, like, be able to, go ahead and add that in, and, have that, start to enter your feed and enter what you're, working on and thinking about. And so, and we want you to be able to go down these rabbit holes and say, like, okay, yes, I'm interested in music. And, oh, okay, great, there's other things I can get interested in. Oh, cool. EDM is, I found this great article on EDM. Like, I want this to be part of my interest now. I'm not just broadly interested on music. EDM sounds super cool, and now I want to go down that rabbit hole. And we want to just encourage this sort of, continuous addition of interest, this collection of interests, this, the highest law is like following those things that are interesting continuously, and having the system, always reflect that. And in addition, and in a direct nod to kind of the serendipity that we know runs things, we also want some opportunities for you to directly expand those interests out. So we have this we call the serendipity slider. And actually, if you're on the physical version and you have this on, if you shake the phone, you'll get actually a different feed. You can literally shake up your feed. But the idea is that, we can turn on the serendipity slider, and it will make an effort to actually broaden some of these interests, like change these interest tags and kind of reorder them, but still, not totally random, still in accordance sort of with what we think might be, tangential interest, but trying, in everything that we do, trying to get you to expand out to this next concentric circle of interests.
And Jimmy, just to add one thing there to make some of these ripple effects concrete. So I can definitely think of a few people, maybe you all can, but you follow them on Twitter or whatever, and you love what they have to say about startups, but you can't stand what they have to say about anything else, whatever. You don't really have an option in that case, right? You either stop following them completely or mute them or block them, or you put up with all the things they have to say. An interesting effect of this is that won't happen here, right? If you follow startups, and whether a famous person with a lot of followers says it, or Bloss with no followers, if it's related to that interest tag, you will see it, right? So it's like a different form of quality. It's a different form of curation. It's a different form of search. So you don't have to rely on, all right, I like Bloss enough on startup stuff, but I just have to ignore everything else he has to say. You can curate your feed in those different ways, which we think is super interesting. And then the other angle, again, Ken, Jimmy, and I spent so much time, but in our Maven related conversations, we don't talk so much about hobbies or other stuff, right? It tends to be pretty like product focused and Maven focused. But I think we've discovered more about each other through this Maven process than we have on our calls, right? Understanding that we both have interest in lucid dreaming, or there's a lot of parenting talk that we just don't get to during our calls. So it's just like a very interesting way to keep, like, Jimmy said it a few times now, but keep expanding that circle of interest to find other people, to find other ideas, other resources that have to do with this. And, in a very realistic way, we think we can help you build your interest graph, which could lead to all sorts of interesting things. So yeah, Jimmy, didn't mean to steal your thunder, but
no, that's great. And so it's worth pointing out that, look, interests are the, sort of core unit here, but that doesn't mean that we only want you to focus on interests. We're hoping interests actually also serve as a great connection point between people, right? I mean, that's like, that's very much what you want to happen in any social network. That, at Twitter at its best, when you get connected in DMs can try to approximate, but the current social networks don't seem to have, any inclination to want to connect you over these interests. And some like LinkedIn seem, just sort of downright opposed to it. You go to connect with somebody who seems interesting. They're like, whoa, 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 weirdo. Like, do you know this person? Is this give me their email address. And obviously, we want people to be able to control their experience and feel protected and safe, and we want to provide people those tools. But we also want to make a place where you feel like you can make new, interesting connections, over that, right? Over those interests, because that honestly is the way that people connect in real life, right? When you're in a venue that's not necessarily implying that kind of connection, you're at your kid's sports game or, whatever, and, talking to a parent and, something comes up and what do you do? And, you find out you have a shared interest in something. That's actually the connection point that lets you get into a deeper interest. So, while making that interest the focus and letting two people at once kind of get into that, they sort of can start to get that connection and find other people that they would enjoy talking to. Like, and I'm showing you kind of we have a whole people tab here where the idea is, you can start to, it can make suggestions and you can actually filter them and go through, see who's following different interests, and find out, okay, well, what else are they interested in, and what other cool things are they posting about, and having people be a conduit to other great interests, just like they are in real life, and in a way that is seems still hard to do on current social networks.
Yeah, jump in there really quick. One of the things that every person who joins Lattice, they do this survey, this application type thing, right? And a lot of it is to get at something like this, right? How do I help people know who else they can talk to about startups or investing or parenting or travel or whatever? And this would kind of seamlessly build that for each person, right? And Ken and Jimmy are going to be tired of me sharing this example, but I think it was so motivating to me in a way where I was talking to one of our early users, and the question I posed to him was just, what are you irrationally interested in? And this like somewhat monotone conversation, and he's super interesting, but it was very monotone. All of a sudden he went like, I effing love guilds, right? Like I can just talk about guilds all day. It's the most interesting thing in the world. And he went on this 20-minute diatribe about guilds. But like that's the power of an interest, right? I didn't have to say anything else. I just kind of like gave him the floor. And I think we each have, especially in Lattice, but I think beyond that too, have that thing that we just care a lot about, but feel guilty or don't want to talk about it unless someone asks us, blah, 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 blah. But if you can kind of have that hook of, hey, Ethan, we've been on the phone a number of times and whatever, or we've never met each other, but I see you're super interested in guilds. Why? That is usually leads to such a better conversation than just like, hey, I'm Blas and I live here, and I'm Ethan and I live here. So we hope that, again, that serves as the catalyst to find other people who share about those things, or just to learn about whatever that thing is. Yeah, Ken, I interrupted you. What were you going to say?
No, just actually maybe one other interesting point to touch on is that if you think about it, the implications of following interest rather than people really change what it means to be able to get engagement when you have something to say, because you don't need followers here, because there are no followers. So if like you have something you want to talk about, it'll just go to people who are interested in that immediately. So you don't need to build up a following, a brand. It takes away all of those usual incentives. It means everybody immediately can have an interesting discussion, and it also greatly diversifies on the other side the breadth of people that you're hearing from, because in terms of idea space, it's not always the same people with the big megaphones, which is what the following type of system tends to create, is a system where there's a very small subsection of elites who have like huge numbers of followers, and they dictate the topics of the day. And it's really interesting because, those people are often very interesting people. But the problem is that after you've heard what they are thinking about for like the 18th day in a row, you're kind of not getting that much out of it anymore. because you know what their opinions are, and they just keep on repeating them because they have a megaphone. But there's like all these other people out there who just like didn't decide to build a brand or weren't famous, but still have something interesting they want to ask or say. You're not generally able to hear from. And so the system cannot actually facilitate those meetings. Well, this system, those people can be heard from. They could be you. And it doesn't play by those rules. So it's going to give you a much more diverse set of inputs into the discussions that you have.
Jimmy, is there anything to show on the posting process? Would that work in the simulator, just to give an example of quick thought or an idea on how the interest tags are created, and just that process from there, just to wrap up the demo?
Sure. You might have to help me think of something interesting, because I can never.
Yeah. We just, it's so top of mind with our girls and school. So, we're thinking about pre-K, Montessori, and Waldorf, public, private, all that. So something random along those lines. But again, while Jimmy's typing, I'll share my personal experience and what I hope kind of happens. But with a system like this, I don't feel the need anymore to think about like who to share what with, right? A lot of the time it'll go into Lattice, but sometimes I send it to another group or my family or friends. And what's really interesting is this just kind of removes that decision process for me, where if I trust the system, it'll go to the people who are kind of relevant to this. And all of a sudden, all these ideas or questions that I had that would just die in my head because I didn't know where to put them or what to do, they now have an outlet. And some are really inane, some are stupid, some are naive, but it's okay, especially early on, just to like try to get the system going and just kind of see how it works. What I hope is, you all early users feel something similar, right? I'm trying to climb the learning curve on digital marketing, on NFTs, on ChatGPTs, agents, how those are built, what people are using them for, whatever. If you don't know where to turn for something like that, like just throw it into Maven. Like we can accommodate it. We can, figure out how to help you or anything. But that's kind of the like explicit ask here is don't let questions or ideas just like die in your head if you don't know where to put them. Just throw it in here. And worst case scenario, nothing happens. But best case, you actually meet someone who shares an interest or might be able to help in some way. But yeah, Jimmy, anything on the loading here to talk through while it's doing that?
I might have. Oh, okay.
Okay.
I think things were just slowed down. But yeah, so right, as you see, it was, in the background, it's trying to kind of classify what you're talking about, make some interest tags so that they match up, make a little illustration for you to kind of make it sort of interesting in the in the feed. And I guess not in this one, I might have broke it in my local environment here, but on some of these we'll also put put some additional resources that you can that we can just kind of think of, like Wikipedia articles, like if we can think of tools or software or famous quotes that are relevant, we try to include those kinds of things too, so that when you are posting, even if you're posting and say, nobody's active on that and nobody really responds, that, ideally we can try to give you something, something a little bit interesting that can help spark your thinking about things,
Thanks, Jimmy. So we can be here as long as people have questions, and we're happy to do so, but understand if you have to run at the top of the hour. If anyone has questions, ideas, anything wasn't clear, please, jump in now or send us an email after or anything like that. But if you have to jump, thank you so much for taking time. If you have questions, now is a perfect time to jump in.
I have a question.
After you,
Yeah.
Connor.
Okay. I'm really curious, what is your envision, or all of your guys' envision path towards the moment of getting outside of the feed and into a conversation?
Yeah, it's a great question. Ken, you want to touch on it first?
Well, I mean, one probably important point is that the feed is an entry to conversations, because like if you look at what's in the feed, you're going to see the beginnings of threads. You might call them original posts, and you're going to see replies. And actually, the feed is organized in a way so you can tell the difference. Like everything that's in the same thread has the same picture associated with it. You don't have replies. Oh yeah, so that's a reply. And so you can see that what this is saying is that it's my name is there. Ken Stanley wrote a post, and this is the thread the title of the thread, and then beneath that Jimmy replied, and it's just telling you that there's been a reply. And what you can see is this is basically going into a conversation. So this is a conversation. So like everything leads into a conversation, and it's what it's doing though, which is kind of interesting, is that every single response within that conversation, every single contribution within that conversation, it's independently computing how it intersects with your interests. So like if in the middle of a conversation about something that wasn't related to your interests, the subject actually starts to intersect with your interests, that will show up in your feed. And you'll actually see that now people are talking about something you're interested in, and then you're invited into that conversation through the main feed. So it's trying to, like we said, a self-organizing group chat. It's trying to get you into conversations anywhere in the conversation where it might actually start to be interesting to you, and maintain those conversations. You can also see that we put in some thought into what a conversation should be like, in this context of like wanting to actually have long-standing, like not just conversations that are killed or throttled in one day, but that are going on and in depth. Because like Twitter, or X will like throttle a conversation after a day. It just wants to get the latest big thing for the next day. So basically just kill it. But ours is like intentionally trying to preserve these conversations for as long as they're interesting. And so you can see kind of this box at the bottom there that says continue the discussion. You don't actually have to reply explicitly to somebody in the conversation just to add something or add your 2 cents. You can just add something into it. And that can help to just go on and on. It can allow it to go on forever, although you can reply explicitly to someone too. You can see little reply buttons underneath as well. And so this allows this conversation to go on indefinitely. And what that means is that if a week from now, somebody throws in their 2 cents to a conversation that hadn't had much activity, as long as that new contribution intersects with your interests, you'll see it, it'll resurrect the conversation. You can go back into it and pick up where you left off. So we have all of these conversations going on, and the only maybe caveat to it is they're obviously public. Like these are public conversations. If you want to have a private conversation, we do allow private messaging in the app. It's not like the feature that we're really promoting, but you can do it. Like if you think I want to connect with this person, or even like a couple people, you can see there's a private messaging section there, so you can create a relationship outside of the public chat if you wanted to.
And just jump in really quick because Ken went over it quickly, but this could be one of the kind of seminal things about the system where, what we're saying is whether it's a post or reply, it doesn't matter. Usually if it's a reply to a reply to a reply on Twitter, Reddit, whatever, it's dead, right? Like nobody goes down like that many levels. But the thing is here, again, it could start off on a conversation about gardening, but then weave its way into whatever, urban planning or AI or whatever it is. You will discover that reply to a reply to a reply if it overlaps with your interests. So it's like a really weird, novel thing, which creates really deep conversations more so than otherwise. Because again, Ken said it just to reiterate, but there is no incentive to reply to a reply to a reply on Twitter, right? If it's a day old, let alone a week old or a year old, it just dies. And there's something really good about that, right? Twitter is very fresh and there's always stuff going on. But I think these forever threads could be super powerful on Maven. But yeah, Ethan, you can DM anyone anytime, but the hope is that the thrust of the force is in public conversations because of that sort of multi-threaded weaving and interest and all that.
Yeah, seeing a thread as a group chat kind of changed the paradigm there. So now I get it there.
Cool. Good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. And that's exactly, I think we're trying to, continue to morph that even more to look like that because, yeah, again, exactly on Twitter, I can't think of the last time I tapped into a tweet and saw a real conversation happening, It's usually just one or two replies there, or in, Facebook, it's kind of like big post and then comment and then maybe a subthread of arguing, or something like that, versus a real conversation continuing to go.
Jimmy, we shared this a while ago now, but it's stuck its teeth in my brain of like the cringeworthiness of LinkedIn replies, right? Because they give you a little box, like a one button press, where it's like, good job, boss, thumbs up. And you just see like 80 of those in a row. And it's just like, exactly. Like that is horrific. So again, like something could have 2,000 replies, but like how much of it is worthwhile? Like very little. I'd rather have one thoughtful reply. And again, we'll start there and kind of see where we go.
Yeah, and you'll already see, on the actual deployed version of Maven, you'll already see, threads that are going 20 or 30 deep, which, for the young age, again, that just doesn't seem to happen on any other social network, and I think it will only get deeper. So.
And Connor, maybe you had to run, or I think somebody else had a question or idea. So whoever wants to jump in.
Yeah, guys, thanks so much for your time. That's super interesting. So I just wanted to quickly ask about how you guys are thinking about monetization. Because obviously now that you're issuing like a inflow based kind of platform, how are you thinking about obviously not just customer acquisition, but monetizing, or are you what's sort of the business model kind of thoughts behind that?
Ken, you want to go for it?
Sure. So yeah, I guess a couple thousand plus you could add on to this too. Right now, from a strategic perspective, I think monetization is not the primary concern. Like the primary concern is, do people want something like this at all? And I mean, from a strategic perspective, in terms of like, actually, do investors care? Like most of the investors that we have, like they're like, don't worry about monetization. You'll easily monetize it if everybody wants this. It's not a problem. There's a million ways to do it. But the real question is, does anybody actually want this? So we really have to build a community. I mean, that's what we really have to focus on. Now, that's not to dismiss monetization. Obviously, we have to survive, like in the long run. And so it's a valid question, but I'm just pointing out, like right now, like that's not the thing that we have to worry about. We'll worry about that once we have like a good core going of people talking to each other. Then we'll have to think about that. Now, what are the options for doing that? I think if you just look at like the kind of information that we have here, it's clearly amenable to advertising as one option because we know what you're interested in. And actually, it might be a little bit of a less sleazy opportunity because of the fact we don't need to like profile you, follow you around the internet or something. They're basically just saying these are the things you're interested in. So we don't need to go figure out, like, based on what your clicks are, who is this person? We can just deliver the things that you care about. And that makes some sense. Of course, there are options in social media other than advertising. And you may be able to, create, like, I mean, obviously X is exploring premium services, premium accounts and things like that, where, you would get extra abilities over and above like what the normal user would use. And that's certainly a possibility here because we've identified several of those where it, like, for example, like you could control the custom picture that you get. It's one out of many different examples. And so there's opportunities for that for sure here too. And maybe, like a lot of people find it maybe more palatable because advertising can seem unpalatable in some ways. I mean, when it mixes with social media, like perverse incentives can get amplified. But I'm hoping that because we've completely scrambled the incentive system to begin with, that the perverse incentive aspect of it is somewhat softened, at least, because of this fact that like we're not like trying to actually like maximize inflammatory like consensus based type of communication. So that should like maybe diminish some of the nastiness of the advertising as well. In principle, if we do go down the advertising road, I mean, we don't have to, but like it's true that there's not much precedent for large scale successful networks that don't have it at all. So that'll be an interesting challenge. Interested to hear what Blas or Jimmy think as well.
I think it'd be a fun thread on Maven, like potentially different business models for social networks. I know, I think Eugene Wei was writing a piece on that pretty recently. I don't know if he's put it out yet, but I think it's a fascinating question. I don't have all that much to add to what Ken said. It's the obvious thing, but maybe obvious is bad.
Yeah, no, same with me, and just want, right, we're trying to make it interesting. And I think that if you know, even in some of these, you know, paid models of, you know, social media, I think the lesson is, you know, maybe the lesson taken from, you know, the blue checks and everything like that is like, you know, you want to make sure that you are offering some genuine additional value, and, you know, whatever that is. You know, and I think that's the way we'd probably approach it. But, you know, our hope is that, like, yeah, you start to get down the road, you're using Maven, you know, it's giving you new great interests every day. And, you know, you're feeling like you're, you know, it's sort of been this pass to, you know, a bunch of new great conversations and connections and things like that. That, you know, even if we did say like, okay, well, you know, this is getting more than X in the feed is now paid or whatever it is, then that value would just be so obvious to you that you'd be like, yeah, of course, I gotta go do this. You know, I need this in my life. You know, so.
Cool. Thanks.
Thanks for the question. You're on mute, I think.
I think someone's trying to talk on mute, or yeah. Right.
Okay, now it's working. Well, first, congratulations on the evolution of Maven. I mean, this new iteration makes the benefits and value of Maven so much crisper. And my question is, can you implement Maven in a private group such as Lattice work?
Yeah, that's a good question. And one thing that we've been sort of going back and forth on, because, you know, like Ken mentioned, you know, we're kind of offering it as an alternative of like, well, if you've been in the WhatsApp group and you like what's going on there, but either feel like there's too much happening for you to chime in and talk about the things you want to, or just too much to follow and archive, you know, we're hoping people give that a shot. You know, it's not clear at this point exactly, you know, if we want to like do that with other groups either, because, you know, most of what we need right now is like great conversations happening that, you know, are accessible to the new users coming in. So, you know, obviously, like, you know, not suggesting, you know, Lattice steer, you know, all of that, you know, toward this or anything like that. You know, obviously some things are, you know, really valuable because they're kind of like, they don't just let everybody in and let everybody see it. You know, so we're focused on like, you know, group connections that can kind of buoy up the, you know, the whole of the content, but there's still maybe some good ways to do it. Like we've talked about, you know, suppose you're a group that, you know, the prior groups out there, you know, say you're like a local interest group, you know, there may not be much incentive to, you know, keep the kind of membership restricted. You may want to show that you're a member of that and kind of like express through, you know, membership badge or whatever. But, you know, if you are a local finance or, you know, investment interest group, you may be more than happy if all of your stuff connects to another local one or, you know, somewhere, you know, across the country. So yeah, it's something that like, clearly there's groups like Lattice that get just a ton of value on that, you know, gated, you know, sort of membership. You know, we want to like have as much of that great activity as we can from, you know, groups. And I think hopefully maybe offer them some, like I said, sense of like, yeah, this is a community. But also early on in Maven, I think there were some opportunities to kind of like focus on, you know, there were like, oh, investment groups or accelerators or whatever. And there was the idea that like, oh, you could build a private Maven kind of connecting people. And we've really backed off of that because, you know, sort of core to the philosophy, right, is that like, yeah, we want to actually make connections and intersect interests that you don't have. Doesn't mean that interest might not come from, you know, local groups. Sometimes you're surprised, like sometimes you know a person and, you know, like Bloss says, you know, knows that didn't know that he and Ken are both interested in lucid dreaming, and that suddenly comes together and connects, even though they talk every day. But, you know, we also want to make sure we're not denying any opportunities for like, you know, big cross-world connections here.
So,
Can I just ask one more quick question? Oh, sorry. Go on, please.
Yeah. So yeah, look, we're hoping that Lattice and other groups want to do some interesting stuff here, and we hope we can encourage that. We'll try to keep it as open and all connected as possible until we think of an alternative. The TLDR.
I just wanted to quickly ask about what you guys are thinking about in terms of quality versus quantity, because from what I'm hearing, it very much is the case that right now you're optimizing for quantity. You just want as many people contributing as possible. But then at some point, how are you going to filter through this, if that makes some sense? Because it will become overwhelming. Having a chat that keeps going is great, but if it's 2 years old and people are still contributing, that marginal addition probably isn't very useful, basically. And just tying into that, just the idea of like the influencer. Obviously, there's that sort of that incentive that people stay on the platform because there's that status or something that comes with followers, basically. So, how are you thinking about that as well? Basically, it's like sort of double.
Yeah, so we do think about quality, and it's a subtle thing, because we don't want to do this usual thing where it's just a maximization game, which is supposed to correlate to quality. Like the general motivation for why you use likes or follows is basically because it's supposed to be a proxy for quality. But the problem is that theoretically, there's a lot of unintended consequences to that actually lead to things that are not really high quality being promoted, because quality is a very complicated property to actually capture through heuristics. And so we understand that the lowest common denominator of content, or the worst content, if you would, like the absolute crap, it wouldn't be good to just fill your feed with that kind of stuff. So some kind of indicator is probably important. But we also understand that at the other end, just going by maximization alone also is really bad. I mean, at the minimum, it just creates a bunch of really, really rare peaks where certain attractors control almost everything, and then everybody else is basically out of the game. And so we understand these two ends of the spectrum, and we're also informed by the fact that this is exactly the kind of thing that open-endedness research is trying to understand. Open-endedness research is how do you create a divergent system, which is a system that keeps on moving outward and not just converging to a point, but also keep it interesting at the same time. So it's not just diverging through total randomness. That's the core of open-endedness research. So a lot of work has gone into understanding that, and generally, there's a number of different ways that can be done, but the way that we've been exploring is called this thing called a minimal criterion. And the minimal criterion, it's used in some algorithms in open-endedness, but also we're using this in the sense that what we're saying is that we will identify a floor. So in other words, you could imagine a thread that's been going on for 2 years. And I actually don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. Some threads, because I actually have been watching, I've been watching some bulletin board services with 10-year-old threads. And it's quite interesting that these things are still really captivating to people. They're on very specific types of topics that are conducive to that kind of thing. But it's possible. But it's also possible that it just putters out and goes into nonsense, which also happens. And so we want to detect that kind of situation. And so what we want to see is that there is a minimal level of interest, which is the minimal criterion, that justifies continuing to show these kinds or surface these kinds of things. But above that, we don't actually play a game of the winner takes all. So it's if you hit the minimal criterion, then we do something to make sure that you continue to be distributed, but evenly with everything else that hit the minimal criterion. So there's no preference after that. There's no maximization incentive. And you'll actually see that there's a clover that appears over posts in the main feed when they've hit the minimal criterion. So that basically can give you a sense of what we think are things that are of interest. And then, some of them, yeah, there's a clover. Some of them won't have the clover. And those are generally just things that we're testing. We're just, obviously you have to put things in front of people to find out if they're interesting. So we circulate some things, but the ones with the clover get more of a guarantee of circulation beyond some point. And so if you think it sounds pretty simple, but it's a very radical thing, because this is not used anywhere, this kind of system. And so we're kind of saying that above some threshold, it doesn't even make sense to say what's better than what. And I think that's philosophically true, that when it comes to what would be really interesting for you, transformative for you, if you follow this stepping stone, maybe it'll transform your life. Maybe it's not that great. Maybe it'll just transform your thinking. It could be something interesting. But it's like, it's not like possible to really rate that on like a very fine-grained scale from like 0 to 100 or to 1,000,000 or whatever it is. Like, you just don't know. The information doesn't exist. What I can know though is that something sucks, probably with pretty good. So it's pretty easy to say like these things are not worth showing. But then above that, like, just let people sort it out for themselves. And that's like the minimal criterion idea. And minimal criterion algorithms, I love them. They're not like super well known, but they're super interesting because they're extremely simple, because most algorithms involve climbing a gradient, like they're trying to get better, better, better. These algorithms is just like everything that crosses through some threshold, they're just treated exactly the same. So they're like extremely simple to write, but they do things that are amazing. Like they can create increasingly complex discoveries, like on and on and on, even though there's almost nothing to the algorithm at all. So like, while it sounds like a really simple thing, it's like a really fascinating and interesting way of thinking about open-ended dynamics or divergent dynamics. And in some cases, like, you can even interpret things like natural evolution as a minimal criterion system. As long as you have this Xerox machine inside of you, you hit the minimal criterion. You all have to do is make a copy. Other than that, we don't have to judge, like how much smarter are you than the other person. As long as you both had a kid, those lineages are continuing. So effectively, like minimal criterion, like even though it's not talked about like that in textbooks. But this is actually like a more kind of recent interpretation to look at it this way. You'll see sort of like notes of that in our book too. So that's what we're thinking. Like, we care about quality. We're trying to shield you from like the garbage. If the thread goes on for 2 years and it just meanders into like nonsense, but people will start to pay attention less. We'll notice that, and it won't hit the minimal criterion anymore. And it's not that the thread will die. It can be resurrected if someone has something interesting to say 3 years after that, but it has to be interesting. And then it'll cross the minimal criterion and it'll come back.
And from a more qualitative perspective, I would just say like quantity within a pre-selected of quality people, you know what I mean? So it's not just like, hey, world, post anything, but I am comfortable saying like, hey, Lattice, post anything, just given the people who are there. So,
yeah,
it's, we will undoubtedly and probably already have a few times dealt with like, stupid ideas or stupid posts, and that's fine. That's part of it. But again, starting from this, like, I know and trust people in this, small-ish group. I give them total freedom because of that trust, and then we kind of ladder up from there.
Yeah, because moderation becomes like, the huge problem of as you expand, basically. So, but obviously that precludes it with that sort of model. Cool, fantastic. I mean, it's just really remarkable. And I just think it's really cool how a book about not having ambitious goals has transformed into something pretty darn ambitious. So it's great. So thank you very much. So best of luck to you guys.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the
Yeah, and
question.
I know it's pretty late for you, so thank you for staying up and for your interesting questions and insights and everything. It was really, really fun to do this with you. Cool. Well, if that was it, yeah, thank you again, guys. This was fun, and I'll stop recording and we'll get this edited and get this sent out. But we'll talk soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Congratulations. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks
Bye.
much.